10 years ago, a journalist launched a podcast to fill a gap he noticed in Canada's media landscape. He called it Canadaland. In the decade since, that one podcast has become one of Canada's leading podcast networks and a go-to source for media criticism and current affairs in this country.
The Canadaland team is celebrating its 10th anniversary at this year's Hot Docs Podcast Festival, and we are so excited to have the network's founder and publisher, Jesse Brown, as well as editor-in-chief, Karyn Pugliese, both here with us today. Welcome to the show. Great to have you here. Thank you.
So, Jesse, let's start. Over the past decade, Canadaland has broken some of the biggest stories from every corner of this country. When deciding what stories to tell, like you say you want to surprise Canadians about their own country. How so?
I think the most surprising thing is that we're not boring. We keep saying that we're boring. Canada is not boring. Like, right now, what's in the news? Peter Nygard is facing these horrific allegations. That trial is happening right now. Our Prime Minister has accused India of sending an assassin to Canada to kill a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. The former mayor of Toronto, we found out that the crisis PR firm Navigator was hired to broker conversations between him and his wife. Like, these are wild stories. You know, we uncovered a story about how Mayor Nenshi in Calgary, there was a plot by a political dirty tricks man to entrap him into taking dirty Russian money. So this stuff, like, you could make movies about this stuff. Wow. These are fascinating stories, and they get overlooked.
Yeah. Wow, that is really, it is like a movie. Karyn, you have led the news team at APTN, CBC. You were also the president of the Canadian Association of Journalists, all massive titles. Then recently now, you've been brought on to the Canadaland team as editor-in-chief. Now, Jesse, you have said of Karyn, you're excited to see wherever she takes us. So where are you going to take Canadaland?
Well, you know, I mean, Jesse just gave like such great examples of all the stories that they tell. It's investigative. This is a small, scrappy startup. You know, I really want to keep that personality, but I just kind of want to turn it up to 13.
Yes.
I would love to be able to have the funding, like we're crowdfunding right now, to get more boots on the ground, to do more investigations, just more of. That's really what I'm hoping for.
Mm-hmm. And now, Jesse, I think some people will remember that you were, one of your first big scoops at Canadaland was breaking the Jian Ghomeshi story. I don't know if people remember that. And that was huge for you to be breaking that story. Ghomeshi had booked a meeting with CBC executives specifically to try to get ahead of you. And that's what ended up, in fact, sealing his fate. So how did that story, what did that story in particular illuminate about the industry for you?
I guess the biggest thing that illuminated is that as powerful as the industry is, the truth is more powerful. I interviewed so many people who were just convinced that his influence was too great. Jian Ghomeshi at the time was this big Canadian celebrity, that his fame was too great, that he was too powerful for people to speak the truth about him. But then there were a few very brave women who dared to work with me and the Toronto Star and Canadaland later on that story. And because they dared to do that, another woman came forward, and another, and another. And soon the truth of the brutal violence that he was perpetrating just became too much for anyone to deny, but he did. And though I think the criminal courts failed some women in that case, because those women came forward, there are new protections for people who accuse people of sexual assault, the so-called Ghomeshi rules. I think they should be called the Lucy rules. But it was interesting to see how somebody who it was thought was sort of untouchable and you just could not criticize, but the facts bore out.
Yeah, that was so huge. Karyn, in an effort to push journalism forward, there's a lot of really big conversations happening in newsrooms right across this country about the role of objectivity and bias in journalism. And certainly there's wafts of things coming up from south of the border, for sure, influencing discussions here. But where do you see this shift going in terms of how we deal with objectivity and bias on the part of journalists covering stories?
Yeah. I mean, the thing about like objectivity is that there's a supposed view from nowhere. There is no view from nowhere. Views come from places. And it determines how we tell the news, it determines how we select stories, it determines what goes to the top of the pile and what goes down to the bottom of the pile. So diversity in newsrooms has been bringing a lot of change. In the beginning, diversity was just kind of like, they wanted somebody who looked different. They had no idea we're going to come in and change the game, but that's what we've been doing. So you can think about things like missing and murdered Indigenous women. That used to be a backstage story if it got covered at all. The headlines would be drunk Native woman found by river. You'd never get a headline like you would for a non-Native woman, like Amy, please come home, or we miss mom. You know, so since you've been seeing newsrooms diversify, these conversations are happening. It's changing, but there's ways to go.
Yeah. You know, Karyn, with also the fallout from Bill C-18, if people have not been keeping up on this, you know, Canadians, we have been shut out from getting news on certain social media platforms. We've been impacted here on our show, for example, as well. Let's talk about the impact of these changes about C-18 and where does this leave us and where are we going?
Well, I mean, the two things that I don't like from the fallout, I mean, the bill aside, is that you have Google and Facebook blocking news and Google threatening to block news. And, you know, public interest, you can imagine, I was just talking about missing and murdered women, you can imagine us covering a story and nobody being able to see that story. That story not getting out to people who might be looking for her, who might be trying to find somebody. In those first 24 hours, they're so important. We did something on shortcuts about the fires up in Yellowknife and how people weren't able to access the news they needed to know.
Wow.
You know, this is a huge problem. So whatever the bill, like good or bad, whatever you want to argue about it, that these media platforms can so affect our ability to have conversations about things that are important in the public interest and to public safety.
Okay, so Jesse, recent surveys have suggested that the majority of Canadians feel that news should be free and accessible for everyone. But the future of journalism may in fact be determined by the fact the people who can pay for the news. So how critical or realistic do you think it is the Canadians might shift their perspective and recognize maybe the value of paying for the news that they want?
Well, I agree with those Canadians who think that the news should be free and accessible. I think we need it, because if the truth is behind a paywall, most people will just go for garbage. And we need to have good verified information. The world is a really chaotic place right now, and things are happening, and if we don't know exactly what happened from journalists who are verifying things, then there are a lot of people who are happy to mislead us. And if the lie is free, but the truth costs money, the good news is we have 11,000 paying subscribers, Canadians, who are paying for everybody else to get it for free. That's our model at Canadaland. So it's not about, I want the information for myself. It's for every one person we have who pays us, there are like 50 others. Our audience is literally in the millions, and there are 11,000 people paying for everybody to get that information. So I think that's a really powerful model. I think people are willing to pay for news.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, listen, yeah, amen to that.
And you can, and at Canadaland.com/join is where people can become supporters of Canadaland.
Listen, any good anniversary requires a celebration, and for your 10-year celebration, what are you going to be sort of, you know, enjoying and celebrating the most?
Well, we had just brought in like all of Canadaland. Like we've got people from different parts of the country. They're all in the office today, and we're gonna have a big party, right?
Yeah, we're opening the Hot Docs Podcast Festival October 19th. Everybody can come. We're doing a live show, and we'll be celebrating 10 years of Canada. So, and you know what we'll be celebrating? Every time we talk about the news, it's bad news. Newsrooms are closing. It's bad news for the news. We've been growing from the start. So we're just celebrating that. We feel terrible for everybody who's suffering in this industry, but we've been able to do something that's working, and we feel so lucky to be able to do this work.
Jesse and Karyn, we are so delighted to have you here today. Thank you so much. If you want to celebrate 10 years of Canadaland, there will be a special live in-person anniversary episode opening this year's Hot Docs Podcast Festival in Toronto on Thursday night. So you can head to hotdocs.ca for more ticketing info. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back.
Hey there, what did you think? Drop your comments below and join the conversation. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you can find more on everything from food and fashion to pop culture and current events. See you soon.